for nothing imbecile. How can you allow a mere harmless girl do this to you? Igbaje, who is the most beautiful and powerful in all the lands? You, Queen Abeni, are the most powerful in all the lands, but the most beautiful is in this land. A long time ago, in the ancient Yoruba kingdom of Irile-Ile, there ruled a queen so beautiful. Her beauty was spoken of from the great river Odo-Osun to the towering hills of Idanre. Her name was Queen Abeni, and her skin glowed like polished bronze under the sun. Her eyes were as sharp as the claws of a leopard, and her smile could melt even the hardest of hearts. But Queen Abeni's heart was cold. Abeni was not just beautiful, she was powerful. She had inherited her mother's enchanted mirror, Igbaje, a mystical artifact said to hold the spirits of ancient sorcerers. Every morning, she will stand before the mirror and ask, Igbaje, who is the most powerful in all of Irinwo-Ile? And the mirror would always reply, it is you, Queen Abeni, the most powerful and the most beautiful in all the lands. But one day, something changed. As Queen Abeni stood before Igbaje, her royal beads clinking softly against her waist, she asked her usual question. But this time, the mirror's voice was different, softer, almost hesitant. You, Queen Abeni, are powerful, but the most beautiful now blooms in the heart of the Oro kingdom. Her name is Omomi, the only daughter of King Adisa. Queen Abeni's heart skipped a beat. Omomi? She had never heard that name before. Who was this girl who dared to challenge her beauty and power? Queen Abeni's power was tied to her beauty. The ancient spell placed on her ensured that so long as she remained the most beautiful in all the lands, her power would never fade. Fury burned in Abeni's eyes. She gripped the edges of the mirror, her long nails scraping against the enchanted glass. Who is this about me? Show me her face, she commanded. The mirror shimmered and slowly the image of a young girl appeared. Omomi was radiant, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes that sparkled like the stars above. But it wasn't just her beauty that threatened Abeni. It was the glow of Ase, the spiritual power that surrounded her. Omomi was blessed by the Orisha themselves. When Abeni's jealousy turned to hatred, she knew she had to destroy this girl before her beauty and power surpassed her own. If Omomi became the most beautiful, Abeni's power would vanish like smoke in the wind. That night, sleep eluded Queen Abeni. She tossed and turned in her grand bed, the moonlight casting shadows on the walls of her room. The words of the mirror echoed in her mind. By morning, Abeni had made up her mind. She called for the most trusted servant, an old woman named Iyakekere, who was known for her dark knowledge of the forbidden forests, Igboro. Iyakekere, Abeni whispered, her voice sharp like a knife. I need a charm, a powerful one. I must get rid of a girl named Omomi. Iyakekere's eyes widened. My queen, Omomi has a pure heart. What has she done? Queen Abeni frowned. If you don't give me that charm, I will kill you. In fear, Iyakekere replied, the only way to truly get rid of her is to eat her heart. That way, you will not only remain the most beautiful, but also become immortal and the most powerful in all the lands. Queen Abeni's eyes gleamed with dark excitement. Then, give me a charm to achieve this. Iyakekere nodded slowly and disappeared into the shadows of the palace. When she returned, she held a small kola nut and a fragile egg in her wrinkled hands. Take this, Iyakekere whispered. Chew the kola nut and then break the egg in the middle of Igboro. That way, you will mysteriously find yourself in the land of Oro. Queen Abeni took the items, her heart racing with anticipation. And once I am there, you will find Omomi, Iyakekere replied. But be warned, my queen, the path will be dangerous. The Orisha will sense your presence. Abeni smirked. Let them try to stop me. That night, under the cover of darkness, Queen Abeni wrapped herself in a black cloak and slipped into the forbidden forest. The trees whispered secrets as she walked deeper into Igboro, their twisted branches clawing at the night sky. When she reached the heart of the forest, Abeni stood still. She pulled the kola nut from her pouch and chewed it slowly, feeling the bitter taste spread across her tongue. Then, with steady hands, she took the egg and smashed it against the ground. The earth trembled beneath her feet, and a thick black mist rose from the ground, swallowing her whole. King Adisa of Oro Kingdom was a very handsome man, known far and wide for his strength and wisdom. He had been deeply in love with his wife, Queen Morenike, whose beauty and kindness matched his own noble heart. But after the birth of their daughter Omomi, tragedy struck. Queen Morenike passed away, leaving the king heartbroken and alone. Since then, King Adisa had shut his heart to all other women. He gave his all to his daughter Omomi, raising her with love and care. She was his world, the light in his darkened heart. Omomi grew into a radiant young girl, now 14 years old, so beautiful that even the birds would stop singing just to admire her whenever she passed by. One day, King Adisa decided to go hunting in the deep forest, seeking some distraction from his thoughts. His loyal guards followed closely behind as they moved quietly through the trees. Suddenly, he spotted an antelope standing between the trees. Without hesitation, he aimed his bow and fired. But instead of hearing the thud of the fallen antelope, he heard a sharp, piercing woman's cry echo through the forest. Startled, the king and his guards rushed toward the sound. To their shock and surprise, they found a beautiful woman lying on the ground, clutching her side where the arrow had struck. She was crying softly, her face twisted in pain. But even through her tears, her beauty was undeniable. King Adisa felt a pang of guilt, and quickly he ordered his men,
"Carry her gently. We must take her to the palace and tend to her wounds."
The woman was none other than Queen Abeni. Disguised and wounded, but her plan was unfolding perfectly. At the palace, the royal healers worked tirelessly to treat her wound. Days passed, and as Queen Abeni healed, King Adisa found himself drawn to her. Her beauty was enchanting, and her soft, mysterious words stirred feelings in his heart that he had long buried. Despite his vows to never love again, the king could not deny the growing connection. Slowly, he started developing feelings for Abeni, unaware of the dark intentions hidden behind her beautiful smile. And as Abeni gained the king's trust, she moved one step closer to her ultimate goal, Omomi's heart. In less than a month's cycle, King Adisa's feelings for Abeni grew so strong that he asked her to be his wife. The kingdom celebrated the royal wedding with a grand feast, music and dance. The people of Oro believed their king had finally found happiness again. On the night after their wedding, King Adisa was overjoyed. He couldn't take his eyes off his beautiful new wife. In his excitement, he showered Abeni with affection, his heart light and free for the first time in years. As they prepared for their wedding night, Abeni smiled sweetly and handed him a cup of wine. "My king," she whispered, "this wine will make you strong and last long in bed." King Adisa, eager and unsuspecting, drank the wine without hesitation. But as he leaned in to kiss his new bride, his expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened in shock, and he clutched his chest. He could no longer breathe. Gasping for air, he stumbled backward, his face contorted in pain. In moments, the mighty King Adisa collapsed to the floor, lifeless. Queen Abeni stood over his body, her face cold and expressionless. She had finally removed the last obstacle in her path. Outside the palace walls, Abeni's army, led by her ruthless brother Shegun, had been waiting for her signal. As soon as the king's death was confirmed, Abeni sent a secret message. In the dead of the night, Shegun and his warriors stormed the gates of Oro. The peaceful kingdom of Oro was caught off guard. The guards and villagers tried to fight back, but Abeni's army was too powerful. With Shegun's help, the kingdom was brought to its knees. Fires raged, and the cries of the people filled the night air. With Shegun's help, the kingdom was brought to its knees. Fires raged, and the cries of the people filled the night air. During the chaos, young Amaomi tried to escape the palace. She ran through secret corridors, her heart pounding with fear, but Abeni had anticipated this. Amaomi was captured by Abeni's soldiers and dragged to the palace dungeon. She was locked in a dark, cold cell, awaiting the queen's orders. The kingdom of Oro fell, and Queen Abeni became the new ruler. At the break of dawn, the once thriving kingdom of Oro was in ruins. The air was thick with smoke, and the streets were filled with the cries of villagers. Their houses were burnt to the ground, loved ones were lost in the chaos, and even the remaining plants in the kingdom withered, as if sensing the reign of evil. Feeling powerful, Queen Abeni stood before her enchanted mirror, Igbaje. She smoothed her flawless skin and asked with a wicked smile, Igbaje, Igbaje, who is the most beautiful and powerful in all the lands? The mirror shimmered, its voice cold and steady. You, Queen Abeni, are the most powerful in all the lands, but the most beautiful is in this kingdom. Queen Abeni's smile vanished, replaced by a furious scowl. How can I be the most powerful and not the most beautiful? She screamed at the mirror. The mirror's voice remained calm. Unless you take the heart of Amaomi, you will never be the most beautiful. Her heart is not yet mature, but it will be in 4 years when she turns 18. Queen Abeni's rage echoed through the palace halls. She smashed a nearby vase, her screams shaking the walls. The thought of waiting 4 more years filled her with fury. But she had no choice. With a bitter heart, she stormed away from the mirror, her mind already plotting how to keep Amaomi imprisoned until the right time. For now, she would have to wait, but her evil plan was far from over. Queen Abeni's rule over the kingdom of Oro grew darker with each passing day. She governed with cruelty and iron fist. Her soldiers roamed the streets like wolves, punishing anyone who dared to speak against the queen. The people lived in constant fear, their spirits crushed beneath her oppressive rule. But Queen Abeni's thirst for beauty was insatiable. To maintain her flawless appearance, she began capturing the beautiful maidens of the kingdom. They were dragged from their homes, their cries echoing through the streets, and locked up in the palace dungeon. Once every 3 months, Queen Abeni would select one maiden from the dungeon. She would perform a dark ritual, invoking the spirits of ancient sorcerers. Then, with cold precision, she would rip out her heart and eat it hungrily, renewing her beauty with each sacrifice. The villagers soon realized what was happening. The young maidens, once proud of their beauty, now lived in fear. To protect themselves, they began disguising their appearances, rubbing dirt on their skin, wearing ragged clothes, and hiding their faces. They hoped to confuse the queen's guards and escape her deadly gaze. Despite their efforts, Queen Abeni's reign of terror continued. The kingdom grew darker, the people's hope fading like the withered plants in their fields. Deep within the palace, Amaomi remained locked in her cold, dark cell, counting the days until her 18th birthday. She knew that when the time came, Queen Abeni would come for her heart. The very day Amaomi turned 18, the first rays of dawn crept into the kingdom of Oro. Queen Abeni awoke with a wicked smile on her face. She could feel it. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Without wasting a moment, she sent for her brother Shegun, the commander of her army and the strongest man in the land. When Shegun entered her chamber, she ordered coldly, "Go fetch Amaomi! Her heart belongs to me." Meanwhile, deep in the dungeon, Amaomi lay on the cold, hard ground, her thoughts heavy with memories of her father and the life that had been stolen from her. Suddenly, she heard a soft fluttering sound. A small bird had perched at the only tiny window in her cell. The bird began to whistle, a strange, beautiful tune. Curious, Amaomi rose and walked towards the window. Just as she reached it, the bird flew away, but something caught her eye. Where the bird had perched, a small sharp nail gleamed in the faint light. Quickly, Amaomi snatched the nail and hid it in her clothes. She returned to her place on the floor, her heart racing. Moments later, the sound of keys turning in the lock jolted her upright. The heavy gate creaked open and Segun stepped into the cell, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. The heavy gate creaked open and Segun stepped into the cell, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her.
The queen has asked for you,
he growled. Amaomi's voice was steady. Why does she want to see me? Segun's lips curled into a cruel smile.
She wants your heart.
He stepped closer, his eyes dark with malice.
But before I hand you over to her, I will have a taste of you.
In a flash, Segun pounced on her, his strength overwhelming, but Amaomi was ready. With all her might, she pulled out the hidden nail and stabbed him deep in the neck. Segun screamed in pain, staggering backward as blood poured from the wound. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his neck. Without hesitation, Amaomi grabbed the keys that had fallen from his belt and sprinted out of the cell, her heart pounding in her chest as Segun's agonized screams echoed through the dungeon, alerting the palace guards. The guards gave chase, their footsteps thundering behind her as she darted through the palace corridors. Desperate for an escape, Amaomi spotted a group of birds circling near a tunnel that led to the palace's water exit. Without thinking, she dashed towards the tunnel and slipped inside. The narrow passage was dark and cold, but she pressed on. Her only thought was to survive. As she reached the end of the tunnel, Amaomi lost her footing and fell into a pit of dirty water. She struggled to keep afloat, the foul water stinging her eyes and nose, but she didn't give up. She swam through the murky depths until she saw a faint light ahead. Pushing herself towards it, she found an opening that led to the sea. Without a second thought, Amaomi plunged into the vast open water. Down in the depth of the sea, Amaomi thought she was dead. The cold depths wrapped around her like a shroud, but then something inside her stirred. A flicker of her father's voice, a memory of his strong arms guiding her through the waters of Oro, teaching her how to swim. Her eyes flew open. I must leave, she thought. Summoning all her strength, Amaomi kicked her legs and began to swim upward. The water fought against her, but she pressed on, her father's lessons echoing in her mind. Finally, her head broke the surface. She gasped for air, the salty wind filling her lungs. She looked around and saw the shoreline not far off. With heavy arms and legs, she swam towards it, each stroke fueled by the desperate will to survive. Back in the kingdom of Oro, the piercing sound of a horn echoed through the air. The alarm had been raised. A prisoner had escaped. Warriors mounted their horses, their faces grim as they charged towards the sea. Their orders clear: bring Amaomi back. In the palace, Segun stumbled into Queen Abeni's chambers, blood still dripping from his neck from where Amaomi had stabbed him. Before he could utter a word, Queen Abeni's hand lashed out, slapping him hard across the face. You good-for-nothing imbecile, she hissed, her eyes glowing red with fury. How can you allow a mere armless girl to defeat you? Segun lowered his head in shame, but before he could speak, Queen Abeni pointed at him. Her eyes blazed brighter, and with a flick of her fingers, the wound on his neck healed instantly. Bring her to me, she snarled. Alive! Segun bowed low and hurried out of the room, his pride wounded deeper than his flesh. Meanwhile, Amaomi dragged herself onto the shore, her body trembling from exhaustion. The wet sand clung to her skin, but she knew she couldn't rest. I must stay alive, she told herself. In the distance, she saw a dark forest looming before her, the forest of the dead. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, saying it was cursed, filled with the spirits of those who had never found peace. But Amaomi had no choice. Pushing herself to her feet, she stumbled forward, her legs weak but determined. She entered the forest, the shadows swallowing her whole as she disappeared into its depths. Behind her, the sound of hoofs thundered closer. The queen's guards were coming. As Amaomi ran deeper into the forest of the dead, fear gripped her heart. She had never been in such a place in her entire life. The air was thick and cold, and every sound seemed to echo off the twisted trees that loomed over her. Their claw-like branches stretched toward her, as if trying to snatch her from the ground. Strange glowing eyes locked in the shadows, watching her every move. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs trembling beneath her. Terrified, Omomi stumbled and fell to the ground. She scrambled to her knees immediately, but just as she was about to stand up again, the tree trunks near her began to shift and twist. Before her horrified eyes, the trees transformed into enormous snakes, their scales glistening in the dim light. They hissed and slithered towards her, their forked tongues flicking the air. In extreme fear, Omomi's world went black. She passed out, her body lying motionless among the roots and leaves. If you enjoyed the story and would like to see how the story progressed, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on the bell notification icon so that once the next part of this video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. Their scales glistening in the dim light. They hissed and slithered towards her, their forked tongues flicking the air. In extreme fear, Omomi's world went black. She passed out, her body lying motionless. Queen Abeni's men entered the forest, their machetes drawn. As they pushed through the undergrowth, the claw-like branches of the trees lashed out at them, scratching and tearing at their flesh. The men fought back, hacking at the branches with their blades, but this only enraged the forest. The trees groaned and creaked as if alive, their roots pulling free from the ground. The forest swallowed the men whole, dragging them into the earth. Their screams echoed for a moment before silence fell, and all that remained were the rustling leaves. Back at the palace, the horses returned without their riders. Their eyes were wide with fear, and strange leaves clung to their manes, leaves known to belong to the forest of the dead. When Segun saw the horses, dread filled his heart. He marched into Queen Abeni's chambers, his face pale.
The men are dead,
He said grimly.
Omomi is likely dead too in the forest of the dead.
Queen Abeni's eyes blazed with fury. She rose from her throne, her voice like thunder. I don't care if she's dead or alive in that forest, she screamed. Just get me her heart, Segun. Segun hesitated.
But how, my queen? Anyone who goes into that forest never comes out alive.
Queen Abeni's eyes narrowed, glowing red with rage. She stepped closer to Segun, her voice a deadly whisper. Then get me someone who knows the forest. Segun bowed low and hurried out of the room, his mind racing. He knew the queen's wrath was not something to be taken lightly, but he also knew that failure was not an option. Igobi, the best hunter in all of Oro, was returning from the bush after a successful hunt. The sun was setting behind him, casting long shadows as he carried a heavy antelope over his shoulders. His mind was still clouded with grief. His beloved mother had passed away just 2 days ago, and no victory in the wild could ease the pain in his heart. As he approached the village, Segun suddenly stepped into his path, blocking the way.
The queen requests your presence at the palace. Now!
Segun commanded, his voice cold and firm. Igobi frowned and tried to walk past him, uninterested in royal summons. But Segun grabbed him roughly by the arm, his grip like iron.
You have no choice, hunter.
He snarled, dragging Igobi towards the palace. Igobi found himself kneeling before Queen Abeni. Her piercing eyes stared down at him, her beauty both mesmerizing and terrifying. I have heard stories about you, Igobi, she said smoothly, her voice like honey, laced with venom. They say you are the best hunter in all the land. Igobi remained silent, his jaw clenched. I need your skills, the queen continued. I want you to hunt down a girl. At her words, Igobi's heart sank.
I'm a hunter of animals, not people,
he replied, his voice steady.
I will not do your bidding.
Abeni's eyes narrowed, but instead of flashing out, she smiled, a cold, calculating smile. If you bring her to me, she whispered, leaning closer, I will not only reward you handsomely, I will bring your dead mother back to life. Igobi's eyes widened, and then he laughed bitterly.
How is that even possible?
Without a word, Queen Abeni signaled to Shegun. Shegun raised his bow and fired an arrow at one of the palace guards. The arrow struck true and the guard collapsed to the floor, dead. Gasps echoed through the hall, but Queen Abeni remained calm. She walked gracefully to the lifeless body, her hands glowing faintly. She whispered ancient forbidden words of dark magic. Before Igobi's astonished eyes, the dead god's body began to twitch. Slowly, the man opened his eyes and stood up, alive and whole, as if death had never touched him. The hall fell silent. Even Shegun looked uneasy. Igobi's heart pounded. The pain of losing his mother was still fresh, and this temptation was too great. He looked into Queen Abeni's cold, expectant eyes.
I'll do it,
he whispered.
I'll bring the girl to you.
But deep down, Igobi knew he had to be careful. He wasn't just hunting for a reward. He was walking into a web of darkness, and the price of failure could be more than he bargained for. Igobi ventured into the forest of the dead, his heart heavy with the task ahead. Behind him, Shegun followed closely, his eyes gleaming with hidden intentions. Queen Abeni had given him a secret order. The moment Igobi found the girl, Shegun was to get rid of him. The forest whispered around them, its eerie silence broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. As they moved deeper, the trees began to shift, their claw-like branches stretching toward the door, as if the forest itself wanted to claim them. Shegun, sensing danger, drew his machete, ready to strike.
Don't!
Igobi said firmly, grabbing Shegun's arms.
These are not real. The forest feeds on your fears.
Shegun hesitated, his grip on the machete tightening, but something in Igobi's calm voice made him reconsider. Slowly, he put the weapon away, following Igobi's lead as they pressed on. As they walked, the forest seemed to settle, the branches retreating as if acknowledging Igobi. The path cleared, and soon they found Omomi lying motionless on the ground, her face pale, her body still. Igobi rushed to her side, carefully lifting her into his arms, but as he turned to face Shegun, he froze. Shegun was pointing his sword directly at him.
Give me the girl,
Shegun demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Igobi's eyes narrowed.
But this wasn't the plan. What about the deal with the queen?
Shegun scoffed. A cruel smile spread across his face.
There's no deal, you fool. The queen only needs this girl's heart. Now, give her to me.
Realizing the betrayal, Igobi gently laid Omomi on the ground and faced Shegun, ready for a fight. The two men lunged at each other, their blades clashing under the dark canopy of the forest. But Igobi, who understood the forest's secrets, fought with more than just strength. As they struggled, he maneuvered Shegun toward a patch of thick, dark mud. With a sudden push, Igobi shoved Shegun into the mud. Immediately, ghostly hands erupted from the ground, grabbing at Shegun's arms and legs. Terrified, Shegun pulled a dagger from his pocket and slashed at the hands, but this only enraged the forest. The ghostly hands morphed into writhing snakes that struck Shegun with venomous bites. His screams echoed through the forest as the snakes coiled tighter, pulling him deeper into the mud. He struggled, but the forest showed no mercy. With one final anguished cry, Shegun was swallowed whole by the earth. Back at the palace, Queen Abeni stood before her enchanted mirror Igbaje. Suddenly, she felt a violent surge of energy rip through her. She clutched her chest and fell to the ground, her face twisted in agony. She knew it. Her brother was dead. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, brother. I will avenge your death." But as the grief consumed her, her flawless beauty began to fade. Wrinkles crept across her skin, her hair thinned, and her face twisted into that of an old woman. She knew she had to act fast. Back in the forest, Igobi wiped the sweat from his brow. He carefully lifted the unconscious Omomi once more. Now that he knew the queen's true intentions, he couldn't let her fall into Abeni's hands. Determined, he carried Omomi deeper into the forest, heading toward another land, a land where the queen's dark magic couldn't reach them. So he thought. Igobi eventually emerged from the forest of the dead, carrying Omomi on his arms. As he stepped out of the dark, twisted trees, he found himself in a strange, mystical land. Unlike anything he had ever seen, the land sparkled with vibrant colors. Tiny fairies with shimmering wings flitted through the air, leaving trails of glittering light behind them. The trees were lush and full, their leaves glowing softly in the magical atmosphere. Igobi gently laid Omomi down on the soft grass and ventured into a nearby bush, searching for herbs that might revive her. His heart was heavy with worry, but he was determined to save her. While he was away, the curious fairies hovered over Omomi, their tiny hands brushing against her face. Their touch was light and warm, and slowly Omomi stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped at the sight of the strange, beautiful land around her. She sat up quickly, her heart racing with confusion and fear. Just then, Igobi returned, holding a handful of herbs. When Omomi saw him, her fear surged. She scrambled to her feet, ready to run. But Igobi was faster. He caught her by the arm. "Leave me alone," Omomi cried, struggling to break free.
Just stop!
Igobi scolded softly. "I am not the evil one here." Omomi's breathing slowed, and she stopped struggling. Seeing her calm, Igobi sat down beside her and told her everything. How Queen Abeni had sent him to capture her, but how he had chosen instead to save her. Tears welled up in Omomi's eyes. "But why does she want my heart?" she whispered. Igobi sighed. "I can't say for sure, but back in Oro, young maidens your age are captured and never come back. I guess she uses their hearts for some kind of ritual." Omomi shuddered, wiping her tears. Igobi stood up and offered her his hand. "We have to keep moving before the queen finds us," he said. Omomi nodded and took his hand. Together, they headed deeper into the mystical land, their steps cautious but determined. As they walked through the enchanted forest, they suddenly triggered a hidden trap. A large net shot up from the ground, entangling them and hoisting them into the air. Omomi let out a loud cry as they dangled helplessly above the ground. Immediately, 7 dwarfs jumped out of their hiding places, their eyes gleaming with curiosity and mischief as they looked up at their unsuspected catch. The leader of the dwarfs, a stout figure, stepped forward.
Who are you? And what brings you to our land?
He demanded. Igobi struggled in the net but managed to respond.
We are mere travelers. We mean no harm.
The dwarfs laughed heartily.
You giants always bring trouble.
The leader said,
We will eat you for our dinner.
"No!" Omomi cried, her voice desperate. "I am Omomi, the daughter of King Adisa of Oro. You wouldn't want to eat royal blood, would you?" The dwarfs exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. Then, one of them, Aremu the blind, stepped forward. Though his eyes were blind, his voice was sure.
She's telling the truth.
Aremu said confidently. The dwarfs fell silent. Without another word, they quickly cut down the net. Igobi and Omomi tumbled to the ground, gasping for breath. Then, to Igobi's surprise, the dwarfs bowed deeply before Omomi. "Long live your majesty," they chorused. It was in that moment that Igobi fully understood who Omomi truly was. Not just a girl he had saved, but a princess destined for something far greater. The dwarfs welcomed Igobi and Omomi into their hidden palace, deep within the mystical land. The palace, though small, was warm and filled with the comforting scent of herbs and freshly cooked soup. Omomi and Igobi were fed heartily and their wounds were tended with care. Later that evening, they all gathered around the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Aremu the blind, the wisest of the dwarfs, cleared his throat and began to speak.
We are overjoyed to see you alive, Princess Omomi.
He said, his blind eyes turned toward her as though he could see her spirit.
Everyone in the kingdom of Oro thought you were dead. We pray to the Orisha for a savior.
The dwarfs nodded in agreement, their faces serious.
Thanks be to Orisha.
Aremu continued.
But your journey is not over. You both should rest tonight. Greater battles await you. The kingdom of Oro must be reclaimed.
After the meeting, they all retreated to their rooms. Back in the kingdom of Oro, Queen Abeni stood before her enchanted mirror, having refreshed herself by eating the heart of another maiden. She stared into the mirror, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Igba Aje," she whispered. Who is the most beautiful and powerful in all the lands? The mirror shimmered and spoke. You, Queen Abeni, are the most powerful, but the most beautiful is in the land of the dwarfs. Queen Abeni screamed, her voice echoing through the cold halls of the palace. Why is that charm still alive? She shrieked. In a fury, she stormed out of the room and into her secret chamber. She donned a black cloak, her hands trembling with rage. Drawing a circle on the ground with white chalk, she began chanting ancient incantations. The room filled with dark energy as her form twisted and shifted. In moments, she transformed into a colony of bats and flew out of the palace, her mind set on finding Omaomi. Back in the enchanted land, the dwarfs prepared to go hunting in the forest. Igobi, eager to return to something familiar, offered to join them.
I have missed hunting, he
Said with a smile. Before they left, Aramo turned to Omaomi.
Stay inside, princess.
He warned.
Do not open the door for anyone.
Omaomi nodded, grateful for their protection. While they were away, Omaomi sat by the window, playing with some small birds that perched on the sill. Their cheerful chirping filled the air, but suddenly they scattered and flew away, sensing something ominous. From the shadows near the hut, the colony of bats descended and formed into the shape of an old woman, Queen Abeni in disguise. The old woman shuffled towards the hut, her back bent and her face hidden beneath a hood. When she saw Omaomi by the window, she called out in a frail voice, "My child, could you spare some water for an old woman?" Omaomi's heart softened with pity. She hurried inside and returned with a cup of water. The old woman drank it gratefully. "Thank you, my dear," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness. "For this act of kindness, I will give you something in return." Omaomi smiled politely. "That's not necessary, ma." But the old woman insisted. She reached into her tattered bag and pulled out a shiny red apple. "Take this, my child," she said. "I plucked it fresh on my way here. It's my way of saying thank you." Omaomi hesitated, but the woman's kind eyes and frail appearance disarmed her. Trusting her instincts, she accepted the apple and took a small bite. Almost immediately, she felt strange. Her vision blurred and her body weakened. The apple was poisoned. As Omaomi collapsed, gasping for breath, the old woman straightened and began to transform. Her wrinkled face morphed into the cold, cruel visage of Queen Abeni. With a wicked smile, the queen stretched her hand toward Omaomi's chest, ready to claim the heart she had long desired. But just as her fingers grazed Omaomi's skin, an arrow whizzed through the air and struck her hand. Queen Abeni screamed in pain and fury. With a screech, she transformed back into a colony of bats and fled into the sky. Igobi rushed to Omaomi's side, cradling her in his arms as her breathing grew faint. The dwarfs returned moments later, their faces filled with shock and determination.
We must save her,
Aramo declared.
for the future of Oro depends on her.
The dwarfs tried everything they could to revive Omaomi, but the poison was too strong. Despite their best efforts, the princess, the daughter of King Adisa, took her final breath and lay still. The room grew silent as the realization sank in. The dwarfs cried. Igobi cried. Though Omaomi had only been with them for a short while, her light had touched them all deeply. Her spirit, her kindness, and her courage had left an indelible mark on their hearts.
Such a beautiful soul,
Whispered Iganga, the youngest dwarf, as he held her closely, his tiny hands trembling, but no amount of tears could bring her back to life. With heavy hearts, the dwarfs made arrangements to bury her. As the dwarfs laid Omaomi in state, they surrounded her, their hearts heavy with grief. They couldn't bring themselves to bury her. She was too pure, too beautiful. Instead, they began placing small parting gifts by her side, tokens of their love and respect. A golden leaf, a crystal stone, a small carved figure. Each dwarf left something special. Igobi was the last to step forward. He had nothing to offer but his heart. Kneeling beside her, he gently bent down and placed a soft kiss on her lips. As he pulled away, a miracle happened. Just as they were about to close the coffin, Omaomi sneezed.
she's alive!
Aremu screamed, his blind eyes filling with joyful tears. The dwarfs rushed to her side, cheering and laughing through their tears. Igobi cradled her in his arms, overwhelmed with relief and happiness. Omawumi slowly opened her eyes, confused but alive. The warmth of their love had brought her back, and now the battle to reclaim the kingdom of Oro was far from over. Back in the kingdom of Oro, in her secret room, the bats descended and reformed into Queen Abeni. She rushed to her enchanted mirror, her heart pounding with anticipation. Igbaje, she whispered, who is the most beautiful and powerful in all the lands? The mirror shimmered, its voice smooth and clear. You, Queen Abeni, are the most beautiful and the most powerful in all the lands. Queen Abeni burst into laughter, her voice echoing through the dark halls of her palace. She was ecstatic, believing that Omawumi was finally gone. But then the mirror spoke again. Oh, my queen, you are the most powerful, but the heart of the most beautiful still beats. The laughter died in Queen Abeni's throat. Her eyes widened with rage. What nonsense! She screamed, picking up a heavy object and smashed the mirror into shards. Why can't she just die? Her voice echoed off the cold walls, but no answer came. With Omawumi now alive and strong, the dwarves knew there was no time to waste. They began preparing her for the final battle. They understood that Queen Abeni would strike back with full force, and if they didn't act quickly, the kingdom of Oro would be lost forever. Igobi was a great help. He taught Omawumi how to wield a sword, how to shoot an arrow with precision, and the arts of hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't easy for Omawumi. Her muscles ached and her hands blistered from the rigorous training, but she knew her life and the lives of the people of Oro depended on her strength and courage. After 2 days of intense training, Omawumi was ready. Before she left, Aremu stepped forward and handed her a dagger.
The magic and power of the queen are useless against the dwarfs,
he explained.
This here was forged with our blood. Use it wisely.
Omawumi accepted the dagger with gratitude, feeling its weight in her hand. The dwarves gathered around, hugging her tightly, their faces filled with hope and pride. They bid farewell to Omawumi and Igobi, their hearts heavy but determined. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Oro, Queen Abeni sensed the impending threat. She demanded 3 virgin maidens from the villagers. Without mercy, she bathed in their blood, fortifying herself with dark magic. She knew the battle ahead would be her greatest yet. It was either she gained immortality from Omawumi's heart or lose everything. After a day's travel, Igobi and Omawumi arrived at the village of Oro. They went straight to the home of Deji, the kingdom's greatest warrior. When Deji saw them, his eyes widened in shock, but Igobi quickly motioned for him to remain silent. Once inside, Igobi explained everything: Queen Abeni's betrayal, Omawumi's survival, and their plan to reclaim the kingdom. He asked Deji if he was willing to join the fight. Without hesitation, Deji agreed. Together, they gathered 10 loyal men who still believed in the true royal bloodline. They formed a small but fierce army and began devising their attack plan. After much discussion, they decided to strike the palace in 2 days. Queen Abeni continued her fortification rituals, but what she didn't know was how the attack would come. In her rage, she had broken her enchanted mirror, leaving her blind to Omawumi's whereabouts. This gnawed at her, filling her with paranoia. Desperate for an advantage, she devised a new plan. She invoked 4 ravens, dark creatures of the night. She sent them to the 4 corners of the palace to keep watch. The ravens would notify her the moment they sensed Omawumi's presence. The night of the attack arrived. Igobi, knowing how the queen operated, suggested a clever strategy.
We go through the water,
he said.
Her magic won't detect us there.
The group agreed. Under the cover of darkness, Igobi, Omawumi, Deji, and the other men dived into the sea that wound its way around the palace. They swam silently, their bodies moving like shadows beneath the water's surface. After some time, they reached the palace's tunnel water outlets. hidden passages that led directly into the palace grounds. One by one, they climbed into the tunnels, their hearts pounding with anticipation. In no time, they were inside the palace, undetected and ready for battle. Tactically, Igobia and his men moved through the palace corridors, silently taking down Queen Abeni's guards one by one. Their precise strikes left no room for alarm, and soon the path to the queen's chambers was clear. With a nod to his men, Igobi grabbed Omaomi by the hand, and together they sprinted towards the heart of the palace. Inside her lavish chambers, Queen Abeni slept peacefully, unaware that her palace was under siege. Her dreams were filled with visions of power and immortality. Suddenly, the loud call of the ravens she had stationed around the palace pierced the night. The birds flapped widely, gathering at her window. Queen Abeni jolted awake, her heart racing. She rushed to the window, sensing danger, but it was too late. Queen Abeni jolted awake, her heart racing. She rushed to the window, sensing danger, but it was too late. As she turned back from the window, she was met by the sight of Omaomi and Igobi standing in her room, swords drawn and eyes burning with determination. The queen let out a loud, chilling laugh. "So you think you can kill me?" she sneered. "Thank you for bringing yourselves to me. Now I shall have both your hearts." In a fit of rage, Igobi charged at her, but Queen Abeni merely stretched out her hand, and a surge of dark power shot from her fingertips, striking Igobi in the chest. He flew backward, crashing into the wall and falling unconscious. Omaomi's heart pounded as she realized she was now alone, but she stood firm, gripping her sword tightly. She knew she had to survive, for herself, for Igobi, and for the people of Oro. With a cry of defiance, Omaomi charged at the queen. Abeni raised her hand again, sending a wave of dark power toward Omaomi, but Omaomi deflected it with her sword. The clash of magic and steel echoed through the room. "Now, I see that you are prepared," Queen Abeni snarled. The two women engaged in a fierce battle. Sparks flew as Omaomi's sword met Abeni's dark magic. The room shook with the force of their struggle. After what felt like hours, Omaomi's strength began to wane. Exhausted and breathing heavily, she fell to the ground. Queen Abeni walked over to her, a cruel smile on her face. She knelt beside the exhausted Omaomi and whispered, "Now you see, you cannot defeat me." As she stretched her hand toward Omaomi's chest to claim her heart, Omaomi summoned her last ounce of strength. She pulled out the dagger forged with the dwarf's blood and plunged it into the queen's chest. Queen Abeni let out a piercing scream, stumbling backward. She screeched like a banshee as her body began to twist and contort. The dark magic that had sustained her began to unravel, revealing her true form. An old, ugly woman with hollow eyes and wrinkled skin. Abeni lay on the ground, gasping for breath, her power slipping away. Omaomi stood over her, her hands trembling, but her eyes fierce. "This is for my father," she whispered. With one swift motion, Omaomi raised her sword and cut off the head of the evil queen. Queen Abeni's reign of terror was finally over. At dawn, the kingdom of Oro awakened to a world transformed. The once withered plants bloomed with vibrant life, and the dark clouds that had loomed over the kingdom for so long brightened. It was as if the very breath of evil had been washed away, and the land itself sighed in relief. Villagers began to gather, drawn by a sense of hope they hadn't felt in years. Whispers filled the air as they moved toward the palace, eager to discover what had happened during the long, tumultuous night. On the palace balcony, Omaomi stood tall with Igobi by her side, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. The villagers looked up, their hearts pounding with anticipation and confusion. Omaomi raised her hand high. In it, she held the head of the evil Queen Abeni. At first, the crowd fell into a stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. But as they recognized the twisted, lifeless face of their tormentor, a roar of triumph erupted. At last, the evil queen is gone, someone shouted. Cheers echoed through the streets, and the people of Oro wept tears of joy, embracing one another as the weight of their suffering finally lifted. Days later, Omomi was crowned Queen of Oro in a grand ceremony filled with music, laughter, and heartfelt celebration. The kingdom sparkled with new life, and the people rejoiced, knowing that a just and kind ruler now sat upon the throne. As Omomi stood radiant in her royal attire, Igobi walked up to her amidst the cheers of the crowd. Without hesitation, he pulled her close and kissed her passionately, sealing their bond before the people who had come to love and respect them both. Under Queen Omomi's reign, the kingdom of Oro flourished. The people lived in peace and plenty. Their days were filled with happiness and prosperity. The wounds left by Queen Abeni's cruelty slowly healed, replaced by hope and unity. And as for Queen Omomi and Igobi, they ruled together with wisdom and love, their hearts forever entwined, and they lived happily ever after. If you enjoyed the story and would like to see more interesting stories, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on your bell notification icon so that once another video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified.